Hello, I'm Frank Gaffney, and I'm delighted to be presenting this very important program about one of the most serious threats we are facing from the North Asian perimeter. It is the nuclear program of one of the most dangerous regimes on the planet. It's been a building for decades. It has been, unfortunately, increasingly clear that its intent is aimed not just at the people of the region, South Korea, Japan, but also ultimately at us as well. To talk about that program, its present status, and where it might go from here, and what we can do about it, I'm delighted to have a colleague of mine at the Center for Security Policy and one of the country's preeminent experts on the North Korean regime and its military capabilities, particularly in the nuclear space. His name is Fred Fleitz. He has served with distinction for many years in the United States government. He's now the president and CEO of the Center for Security Policy, and it's good to have him with us. Fred, welcome.
Good to be here.
In the course of those many incarnations, watched you focus in on North Korea and its building capacity. You've sounded the alarm repeatedly about what it's doing and put up with the challenges from people who thought, oh, no, we could either dismiss this problem altogether or work with arms control negotiations to solve them. So I want to walk through some questions that basically try to get at the ground truth about what has happened and what is in prospect now. This is a backwards country. How did it come to own and, in fact, develop itself, to some extent at least, the most dangerous weapons in the world?
Frank, that's a great question, and it's sort of hard to imagine how a nation that can't feed itself would have advanced missiles and nuclear weapons. Has conducted 6 underground nuclear tests and could probably conduct another one fairly soon. The nuclear program dates back to the old Soviet Union. In the 1950s, it was part of the superpower competition. We provided nuclear technology to our allies and surrogates. Unfortunately, one of them was Iran. And the Soviets provided nuclear technology to North Korea. By 1969...
Nuclear power technology, ostensibly.
It was supposedly for peaceful purposes. Mm-hmm. By 1969, they had a reactor they're still using right now that is a source of plutonium for nuclear weapons. In the mid-'80s, both Moscow and Washington realized that North Korea seemed to be pursuing nuclear weapons, and the Russians forced them to join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. We know at the end of the George W. Bush administration, at the beginning of the Clinton administration, our intelligence agencies thought they had 1 or 2 nuclear weapons. And we know the source of their nuclear weapons technology, most of it, came from A.Q. Khan, the father of the Pakistani nuclear program and nuclear weapons program. A.Q. Khan gave the North Koreans all kinds of technology on centrifuges, developing warheads, and probably a Chinese blueprint for a nuclear weapon. We know Khan gave this to Libya. In all likelihood, he gave it to North Korea, too.
Talk a little bit about the connection between China and A.Q. Khan. I mean, would Pakistan have the bomb without China?
Well, it's a long story. It looks like the North Koreans not just took nuclear technology from Khan, but they also bribed Pakistani officials. Now, it's pretty clear that the Pakistan nuclear program relied on support from China. China provided with fissile material, probably provided it with this weapon, and this is probably due to superpower competition and also China's rivalry with India.
There have been, after a hiatus during the Trump years in which you served in the administration, of additional steps being taken by the North Koreans to develop enhanced capabilities in the nuclear space. What are they telling us about what the North Koreans are up to and the threat that it represents?
Well, we've seen North Korea's nuclear program grow and grow more sophisticated. It had a nuclear test in 2006 that was about half a kiloton, and in 2017 it tested a nuclear device that may have been 250 kilotons. Now, let me tell you why that's so serious. The nuclear weapons that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima were 10 to 15 kilotons. And 10 kilotons was as large as the last weapon that the North Koreans probably tested in 2016. It was enormous. The surge in technology has been enormous. We know they've used plutonium-fueled weapons. They've probably used enriched uranium weapons, but the 250 kiloton weapon The North Koreans say it was a hydrogen bomb, a thermonuclear device. In all likelihood, it was some type of a hybrid device using fusion. Whatever it is, a 250 kiloton bomb is huge. It's larger than anything India or Pakistan detonated, and it really even upset the Chinese on these developments by North Korea.
And to the extent that it's a huge weapon, does that bear on the kind of capabilities that it would be useful militarily to accomplish?
Well, there's a lot of arguments about they have the weapon, but has it been miniaturized? Many experts think it's been miniaturized and could be made into a warhead, into a weapon. Or is it a weapon they can set off, but they can't get it into the nose cone of a missile yet? That question hasn't been answered. You and I have lots of experts who believe that's the case. And if they were to build a nuclear weapon into a warhead of a missile, do they have the technology to protect it as it falls back into the atmosphere? That's also a fairly complicated technology. But they might not need that, because one weapon, Frank, that I know you've been worried about very intensely is electromagnetic pulse weapons. North Korea could put a small nuclear device into an ICBM and not worry about it burning up into the atmosphere and destroy the electronics of the United States.
Just by having it detonated in orbit rather than...
If it detonates at a certain altitude before it starts burning up, it's possible to set off an explosion that would burn out all communications, and many experts we both know think that's the goal of the North Korean program.
Unfortunately, it would be more than just communications, of course. It could be basically any electronic device that powers our grid or anything else. This is a threat that, as you know, because you've been tracking this very closely for a long time, that has been designed or at least discussed incessantly by people in our arms control community as a prime opportunity to use arms control negotiations to manage the threat. Some held out the idea that perhaps they could denuclearize the North. Donald Trump certainly did, as you know, but possibly just containing it. And why is the record of such arms control efforts so sorry?
It's a really good question, because Republican and Democratic presidents have tried very hard to try to reach denuclearization agreements with Iran and North Korea. I think the states on the other side of the table are more determined and principled than we are. They know what they want. They don't want to give up anything. And they know that the Americans on our side of the table are too desperate for a deal. And these career State Department officers, they like negotiations, they like getting an agreement, but they don't care if it's a good agreement. And I think the North Koreans have been very skilled at going into these negotiations, pretending to make significant concessions, which they never live up to. Then they misbehave, and then the negotiations start over again. So I frankly, to date, I don't think the North Koreans have ever been sincere in giving up its nuclear weapons. I think Trump was getting close, but he still didn't get there.
One feature of those negotiations has often been the Chinese as the necessary interlocutor. Has that been a contributing factor to this lack of success, do you think?
Well, we've been using the SixParty Talks under the Bush administration to address the North Korean nuclear problem, which meant these talks were hosted by China in Beijing. The brilliance of Trump's bilateral diplomacy with North Korea is that China was excluded. And it actually worried Beijing that we were getting influence with North Korea, and we might strike an agreement and make them more of an ally to us than... I shouldn't say North Korea is an ally of China, but make them closer to us than to China. That never was going to happen. But I think that was the approach. I believe bilateral talks on nuclear programs like Iran and North Korea are better than including all these other states who have their own agendas. And Russia was part of the SixParty Talks, too. And they basically did nothing but cause trouble and gave the North Koreans... opportunities to not make agreements, and because they were trying to push anti-American agendas.
There's a lot of talk about the North Koreans still aspiring to conquer South Korea, and that there is a danger in connection with this legislation known as H.R. 3446 that would get a so-called peace agreement, or peace declaration at least, is that if you have a nuclear threat from the North, you would deal with a very much more dangerous conflict should another one arise in this circumstance. Some talk about preemptively attacking North Korea to eliminate those capabilities. Knowing what you do about the North Koreans and how they conceal their weapons and deploy them more generally, is that an option?
Preemptive strikes is something that's been talked about a lot. And before John Bolton went into the National Security Council, as you know, he often talked about surgical strikes against North Korea to take out its nuclear program. This was discussed during the Clinton years. I don't think Bill Clinton ever would have attacked North Korea, but it was discussed by his Pentagon that the nuclear program was becoming such a threat they need to destroy before it gets out of control. I don't think a preemptive strike makes a lot of sense. I think there are simply too many weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, and artillery within range of Seoul that an attempt to take out parts of North Korea's military or the nuclear program would cause unacceptable civilian losses in South Korea. I think there are so many weapons hidden in caves, and I think some of them are very dangerous. I'm confident they have chemical weapons. They probably have biological weapons. I just don't see it as an option.
If it's not an option, and arms control seems doomed to fail, what options do exist as you see it?
Well, I think Trump made progress with maximum pressure, getting the world to strongly endorse and support UN sanctions, which wasn't being done. I think Trump basically embarrassed the Chinese to supporting UN resolutions, UN sanctions resolutions. And North Korea's nuclear tests and missile tests, the missile tests North Korea had in 2017 were ICBMs that could have hit the east coast of the United States. They were extremely dangerous. I think it's possible to unite the world against North Korea, and I think the bilateral approach giving a summit to the North, I think we were making progress. There was a ways to go, but I supported Donald Trump's desire to keep us out of unnecessary wars, not to start new wars. I believe that military action was on the table with Trump. But I think six-party talk-like negotiations where we simply give away concessions that North Korea is not going to agree to, that's not going to work. And I might add that Trump didn't do that either. The North Koreans demanded concessions before they did anything, and Trump said no.
When we're talking about the magnitude of this challenge and the possibility that the world might be unified against it, a question occurs, do we really know what we're talking about in terms of the full capabilities of this nuclear arsenal in North Korea? At the CIA, you've served in a lot of intelligence-related capacities over the years. How good do you think our intelligence is about what's a closely held secret?
I think it's terrible. And North Korea is a closed society. They have good counterintelligence. I have an idea of what they can do, but I can't say it on the air here. But we clearly don't know how serious their program is. There are estimates by experts right now of how many weapons it is, and the latest estimate I saw, I think, was 10 to 60 weapons. This was from April by a former director of Los Alamos National Laboratory. He thought 45 was the likely number. The South Korean government estimate is higher. Some U.S. intelligence agencies, it's lower. We don't know which type of weapons they have. We don't know how they're fueled. It's difficult to collect physical samples after these tests because the North Koreans do them in underground caves to make sure that radioactive gases do not get into the atmosphere, because if we can sample them, we can find out what type of weapon they tested. And they've been very good at hiding all the evidence. We know they have devices. We have a rough idea of their yield, and even the yield is uncertain. There's ways that they can make the yield difficult to determine by a remote seismic station. So there's a lot that we don't know. We do know about how much nuclear weapons fuel they could have produced using spent fuel rods from their 5-megawatt reactor at Yongbyon. So we can get an upward estimate of how many that they could construct, but how many they really have, just only the North Koreans know.
And would you say that we, as a result, aren't terribly confident in predictions as to how dangerous these weapons are as well? Do we have a sense of their deployments, their modes of operations, the like, that might give us a better handle on that?
We really don't. We don't know whether they've miniaturized warheads. I think they probably have, but that's a big deal on how useful they would be. Otherwise, they would be bombs that could be dropped by airplane, and that's not as efficient as putting them into a missile. we know that...
And they're spending a lot of time on the missiles, we know for sure. So presumably they're working on the front ends as well.
That's right. And there's issues with the missiles, how sophisticated they are, but they've made huge advances in their missile arsenal. But we do know that their nuclear arsenal has advanced significantly based on the nuclear test September 2017, the 250 kiloton test. That really shows that the North Koreans had made a significant technological leap, and I think that they probably were on track to have a nuclear test much larger than that if they had not halted them in September 2017.
You talked about the Trump model. You talked about the Bush model before it. What's the Biden model for dealing with North Korea's nuclear threat?
Well, Biden is saying that he wants to denuclearize the entire Korean peninsula, and he's not focusing on the North Korean program. I don't think Biden has a North Korea policy. His people don't. They certainly don't have a China policy, but I think concerning North Korea, they're really at sea. And Biden came in, wanted to undo and condemn everything that Donald Trump did, and he had not a nice thing to say at all about Trump's bilateral diplomacy with Kim. And it was a risk, and a lot of people criticized Trump for giving Kim the attention and the stature meeting with him. But it was a heck of a lot better than bombing North Korea. And we had the outline of an agreement. It didn't go anywhere. Biden criticized that very heavily during the campaign, and he doesn't seem to have an alternative. It looks like the best he's going to do is to set up negotiations with junior-level officials with the North Koreans. That's not going to work. And we've seen signs over the last 6 months of some significant increases in North Korea's military, particularly its missiles. So I think there's trouble ahead.
And I guess based on what you've said, that the six-party talks would involve, once again, putting the Chinese and the Russians into the mix, adding to the further difficulties in negotiations. But I'm a little unclear. Denuclearizing the whole Korean peninsula, isn't the southern half of it already denuclearized?
As far as I know. I don't know if Biden doesn't know that, because we pulled our nuclear weapons out under, I think, George H.W. Bush. So right. I don't know what the issue is that Biden is pushing for. But you make a good point. Biden wants to do everything multilaterally, which means he's going to bring the Chinese back in, which means nothing will happen on North Korea's nuclear arsenal.
Well, arguably, there will be more concessions demanded by the North, which will then be given, and then they will violate their deal, and then they will get more concessions, and on, as you say. That's the pattern here. So is there something that we are not aware of at the moment? They've been talking about getting back into these negotiations, and the reporting that I've seen is the North Koreans are simply not responding at all. Are they interested in the six-party talks at this point, do you think?
I haven't seen any interest in the North Koreans rejoining the six-party talks. They were very frustrated with the Trump administration that it would not make major concessions to move the negotiations along. There also seemed to be some kind of a gap between what Kim Jong-un will make in one-on-one talks with Trump and how his lower-level people would follow up. It could be he didn't want them to follow up, but it was night and day what would happen at these summits and then what would happen afterwards. They were so frustrated that the U.S. would not provide concessions that they resumed missile testing of short-range ballistic missiles in May of 2020 after pausing them in December of 2017. And those short-range missile tests have continued, and they've also tested submarine-launched missiles and possibly a hypersonic glide vehicle.
Wow. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles used to be a fairly elite club. The idea that a country that is as backward and as impoverished as the North Koreans are suggests to me that they're probably getting a lot of help from someplace else. And the trouble there is that they may get a lot more capability as a result. Just going back to this arms control business, Fred, over the years you've spent time worrying about other countries' nuclear proliferation activities as well. During the George W. Bush administration, there was a shining moment when we actually saw a denuclearization program succeed. At least we are told it did. Can you tell us a little bit about Libya as an alternative model to all of the stuff that we've been trying with the North, and might it work in this case?
Well, my old friend John Bolton got in a lot of trouble using the Libya model in talking with President Trump and to the press during the administration. Now, the Libya model has two meanings. One meaning is a state pursuing nuclear weapons gives up everything and normalizes relations with the United States and the United Kingdom. That's the Libya model that Bolton was referring to. The other Libya model is a state gives up its nuclear weapons, a revolution starts, and we help overthrow their leader. That's what Donald Trump thinks the Libya model is. That's what the North Koreans think the Libya model is, which is why I think my old friend John Bolton should not have used this reference, because it was certain to antagonize both President Trump and the North Koreans. And it really did. And if you read Bolton's book, you can see how irritated Trump was at this. But Trump didn't understand the history of the reference. I think there will be a possibility of pressing North Korea to give up its nuclear arsenal someday, but we're not going to call it the Libya model. And I think we're just going to have to wait till the time is right. I'm hoping that the Trump administration made progress with North Korea to show another way to confrontation, that we could actually live with each other and be allies, what North Korea could look like if it normalized relations with the United States, the enormous economic gains it could make. I don't know if you know that the Trump administration produced this really elaborate video of friendship between the U.S. and North Korea and what Pyongyang would look like if it normalized relations with the U.S. and became an accepted member of the international community. It was just a beautiful video. Whether the North Koreans agreed with it or not, I don't know, but it was worth trying.
It will be interesting to see. My own feeling is that if you don't have a change in the character of the regime, you're unlikely to get a good outcome, even if it makes a deal, as we've seen before. Lastly and quickly, one other model that the Biden administration has been investing in massively is another issue that you've focused on very intently, wrote a book entitled Obama Bomb about it, namely Iran. Is the Iran model any more likely to result in an end to the nuclear weapons program of Iran? And if so, could it be applied to the North?
Well, the Trump administration used something called maximum pressure against North Korea and Iran, very stiff sanctions trying to isolate both nations. But there's a big difference because Iran's nuclear weapons program is considerably behind that of North Korea's.
Despite help from the North Koreans, unfortunately.
We believe that probably there's been some collaboration, but we know A.Q. Khan gave considerable help to Iran. I think their program is moving along fairly fast. They could have enough fuel for a nuclear weapon in 3 to 6 months, and they might be able to do a nuclear test in 6 months. This came out at a Center for Security Policy webinar last week. I hope your viewers will get a chance to look at. But I think in terms of a model for Iran, the problem is this terrible nuclear deal that the Obama administration negotiated, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The Biden administration has been obsessed in rejoining it. It's a very bad deal, and for some reason the Iranians won't take yes for an answer. They appear to be holding out for some kind of even more generous deal. So I'm not sure Iran helps us on North Korea.
Even more ignominy for the United States, I suspect, is one of the other ambitions, and buying time to complete their program as they see fit. Fred, we have to leave it at that. I appreciate very much your insights into this set of topics, because it seems to me that the nuclear capabilities of North Korea are among the most important, not the only, but among the most important issues that we have to confront in this modern time, and I fear that the Biden administration is not up to the job. I want to thank all of you for listening to this edition of The Big Picture, and I hope that you found some indications that you need to be paying attention to this as well as our government. This is Frank Gaffney. I appreciate you being with us.